Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. A few weeks ago, I left a gathering and I was doing what I normally do. I got in the car, I was just backing up, driving away, and I was just starting to reflect on the people I had seen and the conversations I had had. Was there any follow-up I needed to do, messages I needed to send? Just sitting there, appreciating the chance to get together with these people that I care about. And my thoughts fell to this one man. Someone I have known for a very, very long time, and I know him very well. I've never really had this reflection before. It just kind of hit me out of nowhere. I found myself thinking, I don't know if he has a single close friend. Sure, he has coworkers and he has his wife's friends' husbands that he sees at barbecues and things. He has some various acquaintances and connections that he's made through family functions over the years. But I can't think of a single close friendship, someone that he would call if shit hit the fan for him, if he was incredibly overwhelmed or feeling lonely or depressed or unsure of how to proceed in a really pivotal life moment. No one. Now, maybe you are one of these men. Maybe you're listening, and gentlemen, I just want to give you a big hug if this is you. If you find yourself thinking, this is me. Or maybe you're thinking, well, I'm not that bad. I have some people. But if you really get honest with yourself, you have to admit that the support system you have really doesn't feel quite right. It's not quite what you wish it was. And I think for anybody listening, gentlemen, ladies, everybody, I think we can all think of someone. If we just reflected for a few minutes, we can think of a man in our lives who really doesn't have any close friendships. So today, we're talking about how men can start to rebuild their social circles and find the support that they need. And as today's guest says, stop living on autopilot. Now, before I introduce you to today's guest and we dive in, I want to answer two frequently asked questions I feel like people are going to have as they dive into this episode. And the first one is, why do men find themselves in this space where they don't have any friendships? And for that, I would suggest that you go back and listen to episodes 31 and 32, because both of those are places where I really, really dive deep into kind of the foundation of the state of men's friendships. The second question is, why does this matter? And I'm sure just in the moment, we can say this matters because it's not good for anyone to feel lonely or depressed or anxious or without support. But I want to push this a little bit further because although we can think of the immediate consequences, I think that one of the least talked about aspects of men finding themselves in this place is the fact that big life stuff does happen to men, stuff where they need other people and they need help. I can think of two quick examples off the top of my head. Jay, who is a man in his 50s that I know from a community group, he came up to me one day and he told me, I need you to know that the work you're doing is really important. I said, oh, well, thank you. Would you mind sharing why you feel that way? And he said, I found myself on the receiving end of a really not great divorce. And I realized as I was going through that divorce that all my friends were my wife's friends' husbands. I didn't have a single friend. And when I felt at my absolute lowest, I had no one to call. My second example is actually my own dad. I've talked about this before on the podcast. If you go back and listen to those episodes about men's friendship, my mom passed away when I was 13, and suddenly my dad found himself the single parent of 3 kids. 13, 5, and 3 were our ages. And because he didn't really have this strong friendships, this strong support system, Suddenly, he was a single father without really much of any help. And if I had grown up in a single mom household, all of my mom's friends would have rallied around her. But because I grew up in a single father household, he was really on his own. And so, as bad as the immediate consequences of loneliness, depression, and honestly, some even bigger immediate consequences of that, long term, things do happen to men, places where they need people. And if we're not proactive in building those support systems, rock bottom, let me tell you, rock bottom is not the moment to do it. Today, I am joined by Antonio Neves, a leadership expert, motivational speaker, award-winning journalist, and the best-selling author of Stop Living on Autopilot. Neves is also the founder of Man Morning, an in-person men's group, and a weekly newsletter. His mission? To combat loneliness and isolation in men's lives by fostering deep connections and promoting holistic growth. With that, let's dive into today's episode. Antonio, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to chat with you.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was mentioning to you earlier, getting men on this podcast has been really hard, which I've worked really hard to find people like you who want to come on here and talk about connection, because I have quite a few listeners that are men. Like, there are men out there who want to talk about connection, who want to hear this stuff. Just not everybody will get behind the microphone, is what I've found. So thank you for getting behind the microphone today and coming on here to talk about this.
I'm fired up to talk about this. Friendship is a critical subject for me. It's so important. Unfortunately, I think in society, and I'll say Western society, specifically United States culture, a lot of dudes, we're taught to do what you're supposed to do. Don't complain. Don't say much. Keep your head up and keep moving forward. And that's been kind of instilled in us for so long. So we don't talk about these things. And sometimes, unfortunately, even when we do open up and share these things, I think a lot of men, they feel like it can be used against them when they show a little bit more vulnerability or transparency with how they're feeling, whether that's with friends, whether that's in the workplace. Heck, sometimes for people sharing how they really feel with their spouse can be challenging as well. So unfortunately, we end up holding it in. And so many men right now are what I like to call emotionally constipated. We have a backlog of emotions that are not getting out. I'm talking about joy isn't getting out. We're not celebrating wins enough.
Yes.
Anger's not getting out. That's a big one. Sadness isn't getting out. Fear. And it's just, we're holding it all inside. And unfortunately, it's like a can of soda. It's just being shaken up nonstop. And typically, unfortunately, it explodes at the wrong time. And so that's why I'm committed to providing release valves, if you will, for men to share these things, to be real, to be transparent, vulnerable, all those words that are popular on the internet. So they know they're not in this alone.
Yes, they are not in this alone. One of the reasons I just want to share, like, to anybody listening, one of the reasons I personally think that this is so important is I grew up in a single father household. My mom passed away when I was 13, and my dad became a single parent I was 13, my sister was 5, and my brother was 3. And he needed more support.
Mm-hmm.
He really made it look like he had it together. And as somebody who, grew up in that household, he didn't. He needed support. And anything I can do to have these conversations and find, as you're saying, those release valves for more men is so important, because so many men are out there trying to look like they have it all together when they don't. And I think I got a real inside view of that, obviously being the oldest daughter of a man who really was trying to look like he had it together. And the world just honestly kept telling him he had it together.
Well, first, I appreciate you for sharing that. I did not know that. I can't imagine what that was like, obviously, for the loss for you of a mother and your siblings, but also what it was like for your father to go through that experience. And I think a lot of men, we put a lot on our shoulders. We put a lot on our back because we're like, society will say you're the head of the household or whatever. And we want to make sure everyone else is okay. I'm sure he wanted to hold space and make sure
100%.
y'all could just live life as best as you could after that loss. He didn't want you worrying about him. He didn't want you to see him, his worries, his fears, his tears at night, his vulnerabilities, because he wanted you to feel good about things. And listen, I'm guilty of that as well. I have 8-year-old twins and my wife. And there's a lot that I don't always share inside of the house because I don't want to put my burdens on them. As Esther Perel talks about, we kind of expect our partners to be everything to us. And it's too much to expect your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, partner, whatever, to be everything. That's why it's so important to have community where you can have
Couldn't
those
agree more.
release valves, where you can share those things with other people, not put everything on them. And I know firsthand, working closely with men who I coach, who you look at the internet, you look at Instagram, you look at LinkedIn, these men are winning. According to the internet, they are living their best life ever. But all it takes is me having a conversation with them. When they reach out, they send that DM, or they read Stop Living on Autopilot, my book. And they're like, nah, man, that's a story, but that is not the whole story. And I think I've been able to build trust with a lot of men because in my book, Stop Living on Autopilot, I talk about that. Being the guy that, according to the internet, was living his best life ever, but behind the scenes was struggling as a new father, struggling as a husband, as a guy who never wasn't raised with the father, as a guy who experienced 6 divorces between my mom and my dad growing up. I didn't know what it meant to be a husband. I didn't know what it meant to be a father. As an entrepreneur who was used to working in corporate America, there was so much, but I didn't want to say that out loud. But we all have that kind of breaking point where we have that coming to Jesus moment, whatever you want to call it, where life hits us head on. And if there is a message for a lot of men and women listening, and I wrote about this in the Man Morning newsletter recently, is that I want to remind people that rock bottom is not required.
Yes.
I think we think that we have to have that horrible moment of rock bottom, of getting a DUI, of getting served divorce papers, of losing our job, being estranged from our spouse, gaining 30 pounds of weight like I did, all these different things. Rock bottom is not required. We can slowly but surely attack this thing head on.
I say something similar as somebody who has had some rock bottom in my life. Now that you've heard a little bit of my story, I always say, like, rock bottom is not the moment to build your support system. You're so overwhelmed. Like, be kind to your future self and build that now. Be proactive about it. Like, you are going to need these people at some point, if not already now, because we all need people all the time. Don't wait. Stop waiting. But something you said, like, let's get into it here. Let's get into it. You said people come to you, right? And you kind of start asking questions, poking around. Men look like, they're LinkedIn, they're checking all the boxes. They look like they have it together. If there's a man in my life or in my husband's life that maybe he thinks is trying to look like they have it all together, do you have any advice on how to approach that conversation if he's trying to be there for a friend?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you can't force it. If an intervention isn't needed, if it's gotten that crazy, the best thing that you can do is, for men, you've heard this before, it's cliche. They say women are very much face-to-face communicators,
Mm-hmm.
and men are side-to-side communicators. And I've seen examples of both. So I know there's research that backs that up. And I know that I can sit down and have dinner with a dude face-to-face and be good as well. I say you got to put yourself in situations where silence is okay, where you can have that walk and talk. An interesting thing about the Man Morning community is that we found that conversations at 7 or 8 a.m. over coffee or tea are much more intentional, and so much more comes out versus conversations at 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. over cocktails and beer. Now, let's be clear. I like a drink every now and then. I have nothing against alcohol. And I find that the conversations I have at 8 a.m. are very different than the conversations I have at 8 p.m.
I love to pop in when something just stands out to me. And when Antonio said conversations at 7 a.m. instead of 7 p.m., the buzzer in my head went off. Now, maybe this is actually carving out intentional time, like a window where you go and have these types of conversations. But I think at the core of it, really, it's just about being intentional. And whether you do that at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. or on the weekends or on a weekend trip or on a weekday, I don't care where and when you do it. You can do it. Anybody can do this. And all that means, all that looks like, is having some intention of, okay, I'm going to see my friend, and yeah, we're going to hike, bike, game, golf, watch sports, whatever you're going to do. But just think to yourself, is there something that I need support in? Is there something I need to talk about? And I will say, I've talked about Michael here on the podcast. You can go back and listen to episode 2 way back in the archives. Him and I talk about this actually a little bit in there, but he's really, really great at connection. And even this is something I'm constantly kind of encouraging. If he's going to go hang out with the guys, these are some of the real questions I ask him. Like, hey, I know you've been really struggling with that work thing. Are you going to bring that up tonight? Are you going to talk about that with the guys? If there's some really big life thing that happened, like a medical diagnosis in his family, I'll say to him, hey, why don't you call insert friend that makes sense? Because they might have insight into this. Their family member also had a similar diagnosis. It's also supporting those friends. There have been times where I've looked at Michael and said, hey, I know you're going on that guys trip this weekend. And our friend Robbie, I'm just making a name, Robbie has been having a really hard time after he lost his mom. Are you going to create space for that this weekend? That's really all it takes. Whether it's 7 a.m., 7 p.m., doesn't matter. It's just deciding that every time you're getting together with your friends, just spending a moment. Is there something you could use some support, some conversation, some encouragement, and bringing it up and trying to make that a piece of the culture of your friendship? And if you're like, how the heck do I do that? Seriously, go listen to episodes 31 and 32.
I think we have to ask questions. Unfortunately, a lot of us, this is men, women in general, we like to give advice. And so I like to distinguish in the work that I do, there's a difference between working with a coach and working with a consultant. There's a difference between being a friend and being a consultant. Long story short, in the simplest terms, a consultant is an expert that tells you what to do. And that's what a lot of friends do. They tell their friends what to do. They give them advice. And what they don't realize is that when they do that, they are stopping any progress. They are stopping anything from opening up. What a coach does is they listen extremely well, and they're willing to ask great questions, great follow-up questions. A great follow-up question if you don't know what to say, and if you're not a professional question asker like me, 5 words that will always be your friend in a conversation is tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. I was a journalist for a long time in New York City, interviewing everyone from former heads of state to secretaries of state to top politicians, Grammy and Oscar award winners, to that mother who tragically lost her son to gun violence a few hours ago. And so I've learned a lot about how to connect with people and to get them to open up. And a big part of that isn't what we say, it's how we listen. And just briefly, I want to break something down. A lot of us think we're great listeners, but most people are level 1 listeners. Level 1 listeners are when someone says something, they find a way to make it about them. Oh, I just got back from Disney World. What do we say? Oh, I've been to Disney World before.
Yep.
It's great. I love Epcot. Level 1 listening, you just stopped any forward momentum. Then you become a level 2 listener. Oh, I just got back from Disney World. Oh, man, I hear Disney World is amazing. What was your favorite part of it? So you make it about them. And then if you want to go next level, that Oprah level kind of listening, that level 3 listening, which is also called global listening, that's when you have a strong relationship with someone, when trust is there, and you ask someone, say, hey, man, how was your day? And they say, oh, my day was okay. Everything's going good. But as a friend, someone who knows them well, you can hear something underneath that. There's an undercurrent of something else. And you're like, yo, I hear you say everything's good, but I feel like I hear a little bit of frustration underneath that, or sadness. And then they'll open up. And level 3 listening, by the way, you don't do that with somebody like at the cash register at a restaurant. You do that with people you know. And also, I think something you can do as a good friend is just be quiet. The magic happens in silence. And I learned that as a journalist. I know that as a coach right now. And if I have a gift that my clients hate, is that I can be quiet for a long time. I used to feel like I had to fill up the space, but you keep that space open, and all of a sudden that man, that woman will share more than you ever thought they would. Like in the interviews on TV, the 60-minute shows and all those interview shows, you see a condensed version of what happens. But if you saw these things in real life, you'll see someone ask a really profound question or a follow-up question, but you don't see that 12, 15 seconds of silence when that person's really thinking. They just cut straight to it. So I'd invite people to ask more questions and to become better listeners, and to be okay with silence. And a powerful question I use with men who find me, especially typically in our discovery calls when we're learning if we're going to be a good fit and work with one another, is because we don't know each other well, because they're not trying to prove anything to me, because it's a safe space, because it's confidential. We'll have fun, but I'll just jump in and I'll be like, all right, this is great. And I was like, tell me, what's the biggest lie you tell yourself? What's the biggest lie you're telling yourself right now? What's the biggest secret you're holding right now from family and friends? You would be surprised how much they open up. Like I had those secrets. I was a secret cigarette smoker for a long time. And so we have all these different secrets that we're not sharing with people. And those are a few things. I know that's a long answer.
No, I mean, I'm not shocked by the secrets thing at all, to be honest. The silence thing is so real. And you're right. Sometimes you're asking directly, obviously, because these are your new clients. But I told you about my dad. I was a coxswain on the men's crew team all through high school.
Coxswain is the front, right?
Yeah, it's the person who sits in the back and steers and
in
yells.
The back, okay, not the front, okay.
Well, it depends on the boat, but normally, yeah, it's the back and an 8. But, it's me and a team of, my boat of 8, but 50 guys. I'm like maybe the only woman on this team. And that was nearly a decade of my life. I have tons of guy friends today. And part of the reason, I'm a huge supporter of, men finding other men to connect to 100%. But I also think I've found that silence is really powerful as like a female friend in the group. Sometimes I just sit there, and because the men in my life that I'm friends with trust me and we're quiet at a certain point, they might drop their secrets. Like the secrets are so real in the silence.
Yeah, I want to ask your opinion of something, because I think there's something that's very unfortunate now that I think about it. And in my men's group, Man Morning today, we were talking about mentors and mentorship. And one of the guys mentioned that he's been mentoring a woman who's building a business similar to his. And unfortunately, something I found, I'm curious to get your perspective, is that as we get older, and especially as we say get in committed relationships, marriages, whatever you want to call it, I see that a lot of men, or we just in general, we don't interact with the opposite sex as much. It's as if that's against the law. It's as if that's against the rules. And what a loss. What a loss. And obviously that can be a lot with relationships and trust, this and that. But I don't even think it has so much to do with trust, that at some point something has been ingrained in our head that no, you don't make new friends or spend time with that friend that, you went to college with or whatever. And I think that is unfortunate. And I'm very blessed and fortunate that I have some amazing female friends in my life that came with me to my marriage and my relationship that my wife knows and loves. And there's never been a question of trust. But I wonder now, I don't see it a lot with my guy friends or vice versa. I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
I would agree. I think that it's pretty rare. I think that when I talk about how many guy friends I have, people are quite honestly shocked. My husband and I, we're coming up on 15 years together. We met when we were 20. And I think that has a small piece to do with it. At that point, you're just kind of friends with everyone. And had we split off into male friendships and female friendships, that would have really impacted, I think, our social life junior, senior year of college. But for the average person who didn't meet when they were 20, you're right. People come to me and they'll be like, well, how do you do that in a committed relationship? And I'll look at them, I'll be like, I don't know. How do you interact with a brother? With a cousin? We have relationships that have similar platonic boundaries. You can't tell me you don't have an example of this somewhere in your life of how to interact without that romantic component. This really shouldn't be that hard to me. The other thing, especially my husband has tons of female friends, people that he might go and do something with. He might go to a concert, for example. I'm not that into music. He loves music. He might go to a concert with a female friend of ours because they both love the same singer. And sometimes people are like, I can't believe you would let them do that. And I'm like, they share an interest that I do not share. And I think sometimes that's easier too. When you think of the reasons why you're connected, they have a mutual love. Why are we denying that? I don't want to do that.
We're talking about maturity in many ways, right? We're talking about,
yes,
we're talking about being adults. That's really an adult stuff. Because the word you just used that friends typically use, I can't believe you let, that tells you a lot about them and their perspective and how they see things. I'm in my 40s. I don't have time to be worrying about hypotheticals. And
Yep.
if something goes down, something goes down. But I don't have time to go through every scenario and worrying about things. And you get in these relationships because you believe and you trust. And so, yeah, I mean, I love how you approach it and how your husband approaches it. Also, it's funny. My wife and I, one thing we like to do, and we have busy schedules. I travel a lot. Her hands are full as well. And we got the family. Something my wife and I do, we do like solo trips. And sometimes we do staycations, whereas like she'll go away for 2 nights on a weekend. And it could be in LA where we live, but she'll go downtown to stay at a hotel or go stay at some resort somewhere for a night or two to recharge, to reset, to refuel. And I'll do the same thing. Like I tend to go like more to city environments and she tends to go to more R&R kind of vibes. But something we would consistently hear is, I can't believe your wife lets you do that. I can't believe your husband lets you take these trips by yourself. I'm like, wait, first, she's a grown woman. She can do whatever she wants to do. And I can do what I want to do. And we support one another because we actually come back better. We come back recharged. It's like you get married. It's like, stop everything. Stop being friends with the other opposite sex. Stop self-care. Like, nah, maybe that's your story, but it doesn't have to be everyone's story.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, get married and basically deny a huge chunk of who you are. I mean, if we're going to talk about the real talk, Antonio, I've never mentioned this on the podcast, but I'm going to say it. Something I think about all the time, if we're talking about relationships, is the number of people who their relationship comes before everything, like absolutely everything. And I'm not saying it shouldn't, but they can't build in different pockets. And so they lose all their friendships. There's no prioritization for that. And then they get down the line and they've denied this huge part of themselves. And it might be other things too, right? They might have denied other passions they have, other interests they have. And they get to this place of divorce. They get divorced and then they're spending time with their friends and they're invested in a passion in these things. And sometimes I wonder, if you just created space for that in your marriage, would you have stayed married? Maybe, maybe not. Obviously, there are bad relationships out there. But there's this just singular focus on, I never thought I would get into friendship and community and spend so much freaking time talking about marriage. It really is all consuming for some people, and they don't allow any space for themselves or their other connections.
It's so critical to have that space for yourself. And I'm fortunate to have a spouse that knows that and supports that. I support her. Yeah, sometimes they're going to be, quote unquote, you want to call them sacrifices. My wife takes a pottery class every single week. That changes the nighttime routine. And guess what? The kids are going to be okay if mommy's not there for one meal a week. Guess what? I'm going to be okay doing the bedtime routine and dinner and all that. And actually, sometimes it's fun to get that one-on-one time with the kids you wouldn't get otherwise. But also, I know that she's getting an outlet, whatever she's making at pottery that week and the joy that she gets in it. And like you said, like we stifle so much, we give a stiff arm to it. Again, that goes back to these things internally that it's kind of like shaking up. Then it explodes and we think we have a poor marriage. To your point, do we have a poor marriage, or have we stopped pouring into ourselves and stopped doing those things that fulfill us? So it's a big, important topic. And when I work with a lot of men, we do talk about, one, their community, who are the men that they're spending time with on a regular basis. But we also talk a lot about hobbies and what they're doing with their hands, how they're getting invested in other activities outside of the marriage, outside of being a parent. And unfortunately, a lot of men, the only time they get to them is like 4:30 in the morning to 6 a.m. for a lot of men who are like dialed in, who are working out when they get that solo time, because after that, they'll tell you this, they feel like everybody else wants something from them. And the only time they can give for themselves is that 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. window. And I get it. I've been there. I'd take advantage of that 4 a.m., more like 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. window, because I know it's guaranteed and it's just mine. And I don't love getting up, but I get that time. But I'm also willing to tell my wife what I need. And that's something else. Going back to telling the truth, and where resentment builds up in relationships and marriages, is not being honest, not telling the truth. Sometimes that means having a tough conversation with your spouse. The good news is this, what I've learned in my life, and I'm continuing to learn, is that in my experience, most tough conversations last 10 minutes or less, but they can take weeks, months, or years to take place.
That's such a great reminder, because they build up. I mean, I think of that. How much life of you lost because you're ruminating on that conversation, 100 hours, 50 hours, 10 hours, that was 10-minute conversation.
It's a good framing. How much life are you losing? I shared this exercise on LinkedIn recently. It's a fun exercise that people love and they hate it. It showed up in my book, and I do it with clients sometimes, depending upon where they are. And I have them write down the year that they were born. For example, say 1980.
Okay.
Then I'll have them put a dash after that. Then I'll have them add 80 to the year that they were born. So if they were born in 1980, there'll be a dash. Then I'll say 2060. 1980 dash to 2060. And I'm like, what you're looking at, more than likely, if you're lucky, is how long you will live. Right? They get to see the year possibly that they will demise based on how long people on average live in the United States. And then that's when things get real. To your point, how much life are you wasting? We act like tomorrow is guaranteed. We act like good health is always going to be here when all we truly got is today.
So I do think that having you here, having you on the mic, there are some questions I have to ask. I would be a disservice to the men listening to this to not ask these questions. If somebody is out there and they feel like they are on autopilot, they're feeling like they're lacking connections, where would you tell them to start?
Great question. And so many men come to me with that question. I feel like I'm on autopilot. What do I do? First and foremost, don't do it alone. Whatever you do. Let me tell you what's not going to solve your problems. Thinking really hard. Sitting down and thinking really hard is not going to solve your problems. So I recommend outreach, and you can do a couple of things. One, you can work with a coach like me or someone else that you can find that you can work with to explore these things, or maybe therapy is an option. If you want more entry level, check out a book like mine, Stop Living on Autopilot, or something like that. But something that's key is ongoing community, and like the Man Morning community, which are chapters all across the country, are a game changer because we show up every single week and we ask two questions. Number one, what are you celebrating, personally or professionally, big or small? And the second question that we ask is, what are you navigating, personally, professionally, big or small? And you get that rare outlet where you can get that release of what's really going on in your life. So what's amazing about, and again, if you don't have a Man Morning community or a men's group, the best thing you can do is find places in your community face to face where people go to grow, where they go to get better. I don't care if it's a church group, if it's a men's group, maybe it's a sports league, maybe just you start off with going to a class at the gym, but somewhere where people show up to get better. And the key thing about that is, regardless of what the outcome is for that hour that you spend together with people, is that I found that having something on the calendar is critical. One of the first things I do when I audit the men that I work with, and I audit their life, if you will, and do kind of a diagnostic to tune up to see where they are, is I look at the calendar and I look at their schedule. And I find, sadly, for a lot of men who are struggling, who are going through isolation, loneliness, and disconnection, to your point earlier, our point earlier, outside of work and family, there's nothing else on their calendar that is specifically for them, that they have to look forward to every single week. The interesting thing about the Man Morning community is that it's an opt-out community, meaning ours happens on Thursday mornings. And so we don't have the text that goes out the night before and people say, hey, who's in tomorrow? No, we expect you to be in. We expect you to be there. It's opt-out. You only text and say something if you will not attend because you're out of town, because you're expected. So it's opt-out as opposed to opting in. It just saves so much time and energy. So, of course, you can work with a coach. You can join a group. But more than anything, I just want people to have somewhere to be on their calendar. And I think a key part of this, and this is, we don't talk about this enough, and I've been guilty of doing this earlier in a previous chapter of my life. Sometimes when it comes to personal development, when it comes to self-help, when it comes to getting better, not sometimes, mostly all the times, we must be willing sometimes to write a check, to be willing to invest in ourselves. We are willing to invest in so many different things, hand over our credit card for this subscription, pay for this, buy this round of drinks, do this. But when it comes to this small investment in you, whether it's for a coaching session, for joining this group, to going to that conference or that event, we have so much hesitation. And I want to normalize investing in yourself. It's like the only investment that has like the potential for infinite return in investing in ourselves. So beyond all of that, I just hope if someone hears something, they're willing to invest in themselves.
Right. We all have our resources. I say our time, our attention, our energy, and our money. And you can use all of those for connection, which is what you're saying with the write the check thing. But we also can be smart about it. So it's funny you mentioned, it's not funny you mentioned because it's one of your principles, but the opt out thing, I picked through your Man Morning archives before this interview. And that one stood out to me because I think it is so important for somebody, especially somebody who maybe feels like they're restarting connection in their life a little bit, reinvesting in this. It's new, right? It has not been on their calendar and they're putting on their calendar. Get something recurring. Be smart with your energy. Get something that is on there dependably, because if you have to send out a text every week to try and set something up, that's just another barrier of entry. Make the decision once, get it on your calendar, and then you can use your energy to show up instead of trying to set it up and like muscling your way through this.
Amazing advice. Like, we don't waste time. It just saves so much energy. And, one thing we have something called the Man Morning One Day Planner. I won't get into all the details of it, but it identifies 5 key things that I found research driven that if we do them every single day, it will lead to a good day, sometimes a great day. And one of those key things is connecting with someone. So for that guy that is going through a tough time, challenging season, is a little bit on autopilot, cruise control, my hope is that you can connect with someone every single day. When I say connect, I'm not talking about doing what most people do. Text messaging doesn't count. Leaving someone a voice note doesn't count. I'm talking about hearing someone's voice, like whether it's through a phone call, whether it's face-to-face, FaceTime video, WhatsApp, whatever, hearing their voice. And it doesn't need to be a long, drawn-out conversation. It can be 5 minutes. And I find that every single day I have this on my Man Morning One Day Planner, that I have to cross all these things. And when I hit connect, I know that I fulfilled something really, really important. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm having hour-long conversations with people every single day. I'm not. Sometimes it's like a 10-minute call or something like that. Like, for example, as much as this is a podcast and you'll publish this, I've reached a point in life, even with podcast interview, I consider this connecting with someone.
Oh, yeah.
You're hearing me. This is a conversation. Yeah, hopefully it's going to add value for someone else and exist for a long time. And I'm connecting with you. I'm getting benefit out of this as well,
I would agree with that. Like you're saying, there's a variety of ways to connect. Get creative with it. Also, try out different things. You never know what's going to work for you. And if you're just always texting and that feels hollow, try something new.
And what that's going to require is something that tends to go away as we get a little bit older, is we lose being bold. We lose being courageous. We lose trying out something new. I posted something recently and it said something to the tune, the reason why older generations have such a problem with younger generations is because they remind us of who we used to be and how we used to show up with excitement, with optimism, with vigor. There's nothing we weren't going to do. We were bold and we were courageous. And then as we get older and we get more responsibilities, all of a sudden that person disappears. There's this great article in the New York Times back in 2016, and 2 co-founders of a company were being interviewed. They started this company in New York City in the 1990s. And at some point, they're talking about New York City and what it was like in the 1990s. And the guy said, "Oh, man, I really miss the old New York." He's talking about how different New York City was in the 90s and early 2000s. But then his business partner corrected him. He said, "You don't miss the old New York. What you miss is the old you and how you used to show up in life." And that's what a lot of men miss right now. The old them, how they used to be, how they used to show up. And that's what I love working with people, when I see them kind of slowly but surely turn that switch and try new things. And all of a sudden it's a weeknight and they're like, I can't believe I'm going out past 7 p.m. What, the world is coming to an end. I'm leaving my house. What, this thing starts at 8 p.m.? Oh my God, how am I so late? But something activates in that. They get something out of it. And I mean, listen, in terms of trying something new, this doesn't deal with connecting. Your viewers, your listeners won't be able to see this, but so one thing I'm getting into right now is I've been into for a variety of years building these little miniature model houses. And I'm so happy that I'm going to be building this miniature house that is Becca's baking house, this DIY kit. And it's like trying something new. And I get so much out of this and time just disappears. It's a blast.
I mean, that actually leads into what I wanted to talk about next, right? You're trying something new. You're doing an activity. You're having an experience, seeking out an interest. I think that honestly, women's friendships could learn a lot from men's friendships. You talked earlier about shoulder to shoulder versus face to face. And I think that men's friendships, they get talked down because there's a lot of that shared experience shoulder to shoulder. And I have gone to bat with people over this because my thing is always, if you aren't in the room, you will never connect deeper. And for so many men, the reason to get in the room is a shared experience, is an interest, is talking about that new hobby that you're doing or trying something together. And I mean, I've seen it. My husband plays fantasy football, and I don't even know how many people will come at me and be like, I can't believe, again, you let him play that. Like, there it is again. There it is, Antonio. And I'm like, I don't know what's so wrong with this. It's a reason he talks to his friends every day. And it's the reason that quite often he switches into whatever talk they were doing about football to, hey, how was that meeting you were worried about yesterday? Like, honestly, I think women could learn a lot from men's friendships and doing more of that shoulder to shoulder activity together.
I agree with you 100%. And things like fantasy football, those different kind of outlets, it's one of the rare places where we just get to be us and we can turn off. And again, going back to earlier when people say that so much is expected out of us. I mean, when I say that so much is expected out of men. It's the rare time when there are no expectations and we can just be and have a blast. And I have my college buddies that, like, when we get on the phone, when we get on group chats, when we meet up annually, it just feels like home. And I don't have to be, it's not performative. That's the word, maybe. It's not performative. Yep. So much of our life is performative. And it's like a nice exhale. And that's what fantasy football is for guys. That's what the weekly basketball game is. That's what Man Morning is probably in so many ways. It's finally a place where we don't have to perform. We can just be. And it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like getting oxygen. And maybe we don't have the same societal, at least say, pressures that women friendships have when y'all get together and the Sex and the City kind of vibe that people expect those girlfriend friendships to look like. And even like getting dolled up sometimes. I feel like a lot of women, even when they're just going to hang out with their girls, like, this is a broad statement that may or may not be accurate. Like, I feel like there's even pressure sometimes when they're hanging out with their girlfriends to have a certain appearance. Whereas some dudes, we don't have that as much. And I know that's a generalization.
It's okay. I think it's a pretty good generalization. Yeah. I think that there is a lot to men's friendships that actually is really amazing. And maybe that's because I have been friends with so many men, and I get that that's not the exact same, but I get like this hybrid situation, especially being on the men's crew team. I was like really thrown in amongst a lot of men's friendships. And I just see all the connection that is there, all the connection that is possible when you're together long enough to have those quiet moments, when you're playing the basketball game and you're sitting on the bench and somebody asks you a question at the end of the game, that I will fight tooth and nail for societal messaging to change about that, because it's so important. And I love what you're doing. I love all the men who are creating men's groups. So maybe I'm just like the woman that's out here being like, let them be. Let them be. Let them exist. Let them connect. Let them relax.
I'm going to add something as well. I like let them be. That is so good. And I think a lot of dudes, they want to just let me be. And I'm curious how this will hit your listeners. Also celebrate them.
Yes.
Find ways to celebrate them. We're not celebrated enough. That's why it's intentional in Man Morning, where we talk about what he's celebrating today and what are you navigating. I'll just briefly share a story during Women's History Month.
Please do.
My 8-year-old son came home one day and he said something so profound. He said, "Dad, how come they never celebrate boys or men?" He was thinking about school and how every month there's some type of celebration. There's some type of acknowledgement. XYZ month, XYZ day, National So-and-so day. He said, "But Dad, they never celebrate boys. They never celebrate men. How come?" And our society, unfortunately, is only one that tends to celebrate boys. Well, let's talk under 18. Sports.
Mm-hmm.
Sports seem to be the only place where boys are celebrated. And God forbid you're not into sports as a kid. As a boy, what are you going to do? And that hit me hard when he as an 8-year-old was astute enough to say, how come they don't celebrate boys? How come they don't celebrate men? So I think we need to celebrate our men more. And I get it. A lot of people will say, what are you talking about? Men have been celebrated for centuries. They've been ahead of the pack, and we can look at the society and we can look at the gender gap. We can look at, okay, yeah, no, yes. And that doesn't say we should not celebrate our boys and celebrate our men.
I get what you're saying. And I did have this moment when you were saying that where I was like, oh, people are not going to get what he's saying, but I get what you're saying. What you're saying is men are often celebrated for their achievements, for their titles,
Yes.
for the boxes they have checked. Men are not celebrated for just being themselves, for being happy, for having fun, for trying something new. That is what you're saying. I get what you're saying. For seeing them for who they are and not the titles and boxes and roles that they have in your life.
Yes, most times you articulated that perfectly. Thank goodness you did better than I did. Typically, men are celebrated for what they can provide.
Yep.
And thank you for articulating that better than I can. And I'm okay if this makes people uneasy. We need to make people more uneasy.
We
and I'm
do.
willing to have this conversation. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to be, I love my mind is changed or someone shares something. So it was a reminder to me to keep celebrating that young boy, to make sure he doesn't lose that confidence. And yeah, of course, he's going to be an ally to other communities and other people. We're not talking about that kind of stuff, but thank you for how clearly you articulated that.
Well, yeah, so much of my passion for talking about men's friendships is I think that societally, right, a lot of connection work is put on women. And women, there are books out there where women are like, this is all falling on us and this, that, and the other thing. And I get that. But part of the reason is because men can't exist and be themselves in that circle. Like men are often, when they're struggling, pushed out and been like, go find another man to deal with this. And well, again, men need to come together. Men need to connect. Men need to support each other. We also need to bring men into the circle. And, I told you that story about my dad in the beginning. When we don't do that, what happens is men are left high and dry on their own, right? If I had had a single mother, my mom would have been swooped in by all the women in her life and probably supported. But because I had a single dad, he was left to figure it out on his own, which is so unfair to him. And I have so much compassion for his situation. But if we rethought all of this and people came together, not only like men supporting my dad, but like we talked about marriages, other women helping to support my dad, non-romantically, just as a community member, that's what could change in the world. That's why having these conversations is important.
What you just described would change so much. And that's just that openness of learning. Sometimes it's forgetting what we know. It's telling me more about that. It's fighting ignorance so much. And I think that's why the Man Morning newsletter, I'm blown away. First, this thing is growing like wildfire, not just domestically, but internationally. But one thing I love so much about it is how many women are subscribers. I was shocked. I thought this is just for dudes. This is for growth-driven men who want to get better. It's their kind of weekly pep talk, et cetera. But then I started paying close attention, and so many women read this thing and they say, I read this weekly newsletter because I want to support my husband better. I want to support my son better with the information that's provided. So I got to say, there are so many women that are in tune with what we're talking about, but society, mainstream media, press, we don't get into that too much.
The Man Morning newsletter is fantastic. I went through all the archives before this episode actually to see what you had in there, and I can't suggest it more to people. I do have a story I want to tell you before we close this episode out, because I think it's just like a beautiful way to tie a bow on this. That is, we've talked so much about, how men can find what they need. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things today, but I have a friend, it's a family, couple kids, parents, mom, dad, this is a friend of mine. So after talking to me, they realized like, oh, dad doesn't really have any friends. And then they realized how that was impacting dad's mental health. They realized how obviously dad wasn't having any outlets for joy or fun or his passions and things like that. And they sat down as a family and decided that this was the year that dad was going to make friends. And it became a dinner topic, right? They all cheered him on for trying new things, for going out. They had conversations about how sometimes they had to sacrifice maybe dad being at a sports game once a month because it was important for dad to go out and make friends. And it really became this activity. And I love that story so much because for maybe women, you're saying subscribe to Man Morning who want to support their husband. This is a beautiful way to do it, to make it acceptable in your household and a value and a goal for everybody to have connection. Maybe not just dad, maybe everybody needs to do this exercise, but also I think it's just such a beautiful opportunity for modeling this to their kids and for having all these conversations about what it takes to put yourself out there and make new friends and try new things. And, dad would go out and go to a sports game and come home and he has stories to tell his family about what he did. And for anybody who is out there wondering like how you implement that in your life, especially if you are somebody who is juggling a family and a marriage, maybe give that a try.
I love what you shared. I'm so glad you shared that. And for the guys listening to this, you might be a little tired every now and then from going out to that sporting event or doing that thing. But let me tell you, sometimes being inconvenienced is worth it. I love the title of your podcast. And I think one of the foundations sometimes of great friendships is the willingness to be inconvenienced, to drive an hour to your friend needs your help hanging some cabinets at his house on a Saturday. And the last thing you want to do is go hang cabinets on a Saturday. But then you get together and he shares what's really going on in his life while you're hanging those cabinets. Or in this day and age when it's so easy to get a ride share, an Uber or a Lyft, but you still go to pick your friend up at the airport, which is a pain in the butt. And you're like cursing the whole way there because of traffic. But then once he or she gets in the car, you are so excited that you picked them up, right? That willingness to be inconvenienced. Oh, I heard you saying you want dad to have friends. I don't want to go to that hockey game. Then he goes and he comes back. It's 10:30 and he just can't even go to sleep because he had such a blast. So thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah. Antonio, thank you so much for being here. I'm really grateful that you were here to have this conversation. I'm really excited for this one.
Thank you for being willing to have it. And thank you for doing the work that you do. I appreciate you.
This episode was jam-packed. And I know that it also was an episode that really challenged some of our quote unquote normal, whatever that means, normal ways of thinking. This idea that marriage is at the core of everything, that men are always celebrated for everything. I'm sure that there are more, but I just want to acknowledge that these are really, really big mindset shifts. They're not going to happen overnight, but we are also attacking a big problem here. Men's mental health is an issue that is connected to so many problems. Suicide rates, gun violence, depression, divorce. Things are adding up. I see it in my own life. And I also see men and women in my own life who are sitting with these big shifts, considering how they can start to implement them in their lives and how they can, essentially, as Antonio says, take their life off autopilot so they can be happier and healthier and ultimately more supported. The final thing I want to note is that so much of what Antonio suggested today was action. Find a group, find a coach, give a friend a call instead of a text message. So often I think that discussion around connection revolves around this idea of reflecting and then reflecting some more and then reflecting some more. And reflection only gets you so far. So gentlemen, if you are listening, I really encourage you to pick one thing and take action. It's going to be messy. It might lead to rejection or failure, trial and error, not the right fit, weird interactions, messy small talk, but all of that is part of the process. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.